Imagine Christmas morning. The ham is still warm on the table, the tree lights blinking slow and steady in the corner, my granddaughter's crayon drawings of reindeer taped to the refrigerator. And then my son pushes back his chair, looks me straight in the eye, and says, "You're dead weight, Dad. You have been for years. This is our house, and we need you gone." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I set my fork down on Carol's good china, folded my napkin the way she always insisted on, and I walked out the front door into a foot of December snow. But the next morning, before the coffee at the gas station down the road had even finished brewing, he was pounding on my motel room door. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is wherever you're watching from right now. The argument had been building since before the sweet potatoes came out of the oven. I could feel it the way you feel a storm coming when you've spent 31 years working at a paper mill. Something shifts in the pressure. The air goes thick. And you know, Derek's jaw had been tight since I arrived that morning. Pamela had barely looked up from her phone when I came through the door carrying the pie I'd baked at 4 a.m. because Carol always brought pie, and I didn't want Christmas to feel like something had been ripped out of. Owen had given me a real hug, the kind a 13-year-old gives when he actually means it. Sophie had grabbed my hand and dragged me to the living room to show me the sketch she'd made of a horse, which she'd labeled Grandpa's horse, even though I have never owned a horse in my life. That alone almost made everything else worth it. We sat down, grace was said, and I made the mistake of asking about the invoice. I'd received a bill forwarded from Pinnacle Financial, Derek's lender, showing a payment 30 days past due. The same account where my automatic transfer of $1,500 landed on the first of every month without fail, the same way it had for 4 years. I mentioned it gently, said maybe there'd been an error at the bank, said I just wanted to make sure the payment had cleared. Derek's fork stopped moving. His voice went very flat, very controlled, the voice he used in his real estate meetings when someone said something he wanted to dismiss without argument. "We've been meaning to talk to you about that, actually." Pamela set down her glass. Sophie kept coloring on a napkin, not looking up. "I've worked around heavy machinery my whole adult life. When something is about to go wrong, you feel it before you see it." I put my fork down. "We've been talking about this for a while now," Derek said. "You've been living here off and on since Mom died. Using the guest room, eating our groceries, driving the kids places in a car that shouldn't be on the road. The Buick passed inspection in October. Dad." He said the word like it was the lid on something. "You're not contributing. You're not paying rent. You're just here. And honestly, you're dead weight." The words fell across the table like something heavy dropped on hardwood. Owen's fork clinked against his plate. Sophie's crayon stopped. "I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years on the floor of Millstone Paper Mill in Harwick, Vermont. 6 days a week, rotating shifts, double shifts when the overtime was available, because Carol and I made a decision early that our son would not leave college with debt on his back if we could help it. I have calluses on my hands that haven't softened in 20 years. I have a bad knee from a forklift accident in 2009 that I never fully reported because I couldn't afford the weeks off. I bought the clothes on Derek's back for the first 22 years of his life. I co-signed his car loan at 24 because his credit was nothing. I handed over $38,000 from the retirement account. Carol and I had spent 2 decades building because his first business, a property management company that lasted 11 months, went under and he was about to be sued. I gave the down payment on this house because the bank laughed at his debt-to-income ratio. And for the last 4 years, since Carol's funeral, since I moved into their guest room to help with the kids while Pamela went back to work full-time and Derek traveled for deals, I had been transferring $1,500 a month toward their mortgage, not rent. $1,500 toward their mortgage, plus utilities when the bills ran high, plus groceries twice a week, plus being there at 6 in the morning when Owen needed to be at hockey practice and Derek had a flight to catch. Dead weight. I looked at my son and saw someone I didn't fully recognize. When had he started holding his chin that way, like he was waiting to be challenged? When had the boy who used to wait at the kitchen window watching for my headlights in the driveway become this man in a pressed shirt at Christmas dinner, talking to me like I was an expense line he was reviewing? "You've discussed this," I said. "We've discussed it, yes." Pamela's voice was smooth, practiced. She taught yoga on Thursday evenings and had a way of speaking that made everything sound like a meditation prompt. This is about healthy dynamics, Frank. About what's sustainable for our family unit. Our family unit. I looked at Sophie. She was watching me with her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness. Owen had gone very still, the way kids go still when they understand more than adults give them credit for. "How much time?" I said. Derek glanced at Pamela. "We'd like to start the new year with a clear arrangement. New Year is a week away." "We know. We're sorry about the timing." He didn't sound sorry. He sounded like someone who had rehearsed this and was relieved to finally be delivering it. I stood. Not quickly, not dramatically. The way you stand when a shift ends. I picked up my plate and carried it to the kitchen because Carol raised me that way. I set it in the sink. I heard Pamela say something to Derek in a low voice, heard him respond. In the living room, the tree lights blinked their slow, patient blink. I went upstairs to the guest room. The room that had been mine for 4 years, mine the way a rental is yours, provisionally, on someone else's terms. I took down the one photograph I'd hung on the wall. Carol and me at Lake Champlain, 1987, the summer before Derek was born. She was laughing at something I'd said, and her hair was blowing sideways, and she looked so entirely like herself that even now, 2 years after the funeral, looking at it felt like pressure behind my sternum. I packed my 2 duffel bags the same way I'd packed them on overnight shifts, fast, practical, no ceremony, work shirts, my good flannel, the address book Carol kept for 30 years that I still used because I could not bring myself to transfer her handwriting into a phone, the photograph, my father's level, which I'd carried to every house I'd ever lived in and which I could no more leave behind than I could leave behind my own name. I came back downstairs. Owen was at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at the bags. "Grandpa, it's okay, bud. It's not." His voice cracked on the second word, and he was 13, trying very hard not to show that it had. I set the bags down and put my hands on his shoulders. "You've got my number. You call me anytime, you understand? Any reason, no reason. You call." He nodded. His jaw was clenched exactly the way Derek's had been at the table, and for a moment I saw the whole line of us, generation after generation, clenching against the things we couldn't fix. Derek and Pamela were standing in the living room doorway. Neither of them moved to stop me. That, more than anything, told me how thoroughly this had been decided. I picked up my bags. The door opened easy. The cold came in like it had been waiting. Harwick was quiet, the way small Vermont towns go quiet on Christmas evening. Everyone inside, windows glowing, the snow doing what snow does, covering everything and making it look clean. I walked 4 blocks to the Comfort Rest Motel on Route 9, the one with the plastic wreath on the office door and a vending machine in the hallway that sold both coffee and beef jerky, which had always seemed to me like a philosophical statement about what gets you through the night. The woman at the desk was named Donna. Her name tag said so. She looked at my bags and said nothing except $49 a night or $280 for the week. And I said the week because I didn't know yet what I was doing, but I knew it wasn't going to be resolved tomorrow. Room 8 smelled of cleaning product and old carpet. The bed had a green comforter that had been washed so many times the pattern had become theoretical. I hung my flannel on the hook behind the door, put the photograph on the nightstand, and sat on the edge of the mattress. Carol's voice came to me the way it always did in the quiet, not as something supernatural, just as the habit of 36 years, the internal calibration I'd gotten so used to that, losing her felt less like grief and more like losing the ability to read. What would she have said? She would have made tea first. She would have sat across from me and made me tell her everything twice. And then she would have said something so direct and so clear that I would wonder why I'd spent the last hour making it complicated. I opened my phone. The automatic payment was scheduled for January 1st. $1,500, same as always. I looked at it for a long time. Then I canceled it. The next morning, it was Derek's knocking that woke me. Not a polite knock. The kind that says, "I know you're in there and I have decided that my discomfort is more important than whatever state you're in." Through the peephole, he looked wrong. Christmas had apparently not agreed with him. His hair was uncombed, which I had not seen in years. and he was wearing the coat he kept in the car for emergencies, not the good wool coat he wore when he was being Derek from the firm. His Audi was parked at an angle across 2 spaces, with the engine still running. I sat back on the bed. "Dad." His voice came through the hollow door like it was coming through a wall. "I know you're awake. Donna at the desk told me." I looked at Carol's photograph. Her expression hadn't changed. The payment didn't go through. His voice shifted register. "I checked the account this morning. It didn't process." "I know." Silence. "Dad, the mortgage is due on the 5th. "I know when your mortgage is due. I've been paying it for 4 years. So you told me I was dead weight. I took you at your word." The door was hollow, but the silence coming through it was thick. We didn't mean it like that," Pamela's voice, somewhere behind him. "I hadn't known she'd come. Frank, we said some things at dinner that you discussed," I said. "In advance. Wasn't that the word? You'd been talking about it for a while." More silence. "The full payment is $2,412, Derek said. "Monthly. We can only cover about half of that on our own." I pulled out the notepad from the nightstand drawer, Comfort Rest Motel, in faded blue letters at the top. Numbers had always been clearer to me than words. I wrote, $1,500 x 48 months equals $72,000. Mortgage contributions alone. Then below that, college tuition out of pocket, $44,000. Business bailout, 2018, $38,000. House down payment, 2016, $41,000. Wedding, 2013. Borrowed against my 401k at 8% interest, $22,000. Car cosign, 2007. Defaulted once, covered by me, $8,400. That was $225,400. Not counting groceries. Not counting the years Carol worked a second job doing alterations so that Derek's childhood could look like other people's childhoods. Not counting the fact that I hadn't taken a vacation since 2003, because the money was always going somewhere, and the something it was going to had a name, and the name was written on Derek's mailbox on Birchwood Lane. "I need you to hear something," I said through the door. "Not negotiate with you. Just hear." Silence. $225,000. That's what I've contributed to your life since you were 18 years old. Not counting your childhood. Not counting your mother. Just since you left home. I have the receipts. I have every bank statement. I am a mill worker, Derek. And that is what mill workers do, they document, because nobody gives them the benefit of the doubt. I heard him say something to Pamela that I couldn't make out. "You are not going to bang on this door again," I said. "When you have something real to say, you know where I am." The knocking didn't come back. The Audi sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. I watched through the gap in the curtains and then it left. I got dressed. I went to find breakfast. Harwick's downtown is 4 blocks long and covers about 70% of what a person needs to survive. A hardware store, a pharmacy, a diner called Tilly's, a bar that serves food at lunch, and a post office that has been threatening to close since the mid-90s. I'd been eating at Tilly's since before Derek was born. Marge Ostrowski had been pouring coffee there for as long as I could remember, and she had the quality, rare and undervalued, of knowing when not to ask questions. She asked no questions when I came in Christmas morning, looking like a man who'd slept on a motel mattress that had been through better decades. She set down coffee and came back 5 minutes later with eggs I hadn't ordered. "On the house," she said. "Marge, don't." She had a way of ending conversations that brooked no argument. My brother went through something like this with his daughter. It took him 2 years to stop apologizing for it. Eat. Word travels in a town of 4,000. By the time I'd finished breakfast, 2 people I knew from the mill had stopped by the table. One of them, Pete Gallagher, who'd retired the same year I had, sat down without asking and said, "I heard you're at the Comfort Rest. You heard fast." "Donna's my sister-in-law." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "You okay?" I told him the short version. His face went through several things. "How much?" he said. I told him that number too. He sat with it for a moment. "You know, My wife's sister, she runs that thing over at the Grange, Wednesday evenings. Started it after her own trouble. Bunch of people, mostly our age, mostly the same kind of situation. He slid a piece of paper across the table. A name. Roberta Voss. A phone number. Not a support group exactly. More like people who figured out what to do about it. I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket. That afternoon, I called Roberta Voss. She answered on the second ring and spoke in the straightforward manner of someone who has spent a lot of time around people who are tired of being handled carefully. She said, "Come Wednesday." She said, "Bring paperwork if I had it." She said the coffee was bad, but the company was decent. I went. The Grange Hall on Maplewood Road had seen better decades, but it was warm, and the folding chairs had been arranged in a circle, which felt deliberate. 8 people, ages ranging from maybe 58 to somewhere in the high 70s. The particular weariness they all shared, not the tiredness of hard work, which I knew and respected, but the tiredness of having been found insufficient by someone you'd built your life around. Roberta herself was 67, former county clerk, with reading glasses she wore on top of her head and a habit of taking notes on a yellow legal pad that never left her hand. She did not open with feelings. She opened with facts. What legal protections existed in Vermont for seniors facing financial exploitation by family members? What documentation was required? What a revocable trust could and could not do? I felt something in my chest unknot slightly. Going around the circle, the stories came. A woman named Helen, whose daughter had forged her signature on a home equity loan. A man named Bernard, whose son had convinced him to put $60,000 into a restaurant that never opened. A retired teacher named Gail, whose daughter-in-law had spent 3 years isolating her from her church friends, her book club, her doctor, before the daughter-in-law moved on to someone with more assets. When my turn came, I stood. Old habit. You stand when you have something to report. I told them about Christmas. I told them about the number on the notepad. I told them that I had the receipts, every one of them, in a folder in my second duffel bag, because I had lived my whole life by the principle that you document what matters. Bernard leaned forward. That's not a gift. That's a pattern of financial dependency they cultivated. Helen nodded. They don't call it what it is because if they named it, they'd have to own it. Roberta was writing fast. Frank, do you have a lawyer? I didn't. You do now. She looked up. Tom Reardon. He does elder law. Does pro bono work for this group specifically because his mother went through something similar and it changed what he chose to do with his degree. I'll call him tonight if you're willing. I was willing. Tom Reardon's office was above the hardware store on Elm Street, up a staircase that creaked in a way that suggested character rather than disrepair. He had the handshake of someone who grew up doing physical work before deciding to do a different kind. He looked at my folder of bank statements and receipts and said nothing for 4 minutes while he read. Then he looked up and said, "This is thorough. I'm a mill worker." Right. He turned a page. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. 2 weeks later, I sat across from Pete Gallagher and Roberta Voss in First National on Harwick's Main Street, and I signed the papers, establishing the Harwick Senior Mutual Fund, a protected trust for which I was the founding donor, with Pete and Roberta as co-directors, administered through Tom's office, completely transparent, publicly registered, designed specifically to assist seniors in financial crisis caused by family exploitation. The initial deposit was $25,000. My savings, mine to give. The bank manager, a woman named Claire, who had the expression of someone who had processed enough elder fraud to take it personally, shook all 3 of our hands when it was done and said, without prompting, "We see too much of the opposite of this. Thank you." Derek drove past the bank on his way to his office. I know because Marge told me later that he'd slowed down in front of the window and then kept going. The piece in the Harwick Gazette ran on a Thursday. A reporter named Nathan Briggs, 26 years old, who had grown up on the same street as Derek and still remembered which neighbor gave out the good Halloween candy, wrote it with the careful fairness of someone who understood what he was touching. The headline was straightforward. The photograph showed me holding the folder of receipts outside Tom's office. I hadn't wanted the photograph, but Nathan said the photograph mattered, that people needed to see a face, and I understood what he meant, even if I didn't like standing there being looked at. Nathan had called Derek for comment. Derek had declined. By the following Monday, I had received 41 phone calls. 3 were from people angry on Derek's behalf. The other 38 were from seniors in Harwick County, and 2 from the next county over, who had their own folders, their own numbers, their own Christmas dinners that had gone wrong in ways they hadn't known how to name. The Wednesday meeting at the Grange went from 8 people to 23. I did not take satisfaction in what happened to Derek in the weeks that followed. I want to be clear about that. I had not wanted any of it. What I had wanted was a ham at a Christmas table and a granddaughter's drawing of a horse she'd named after me. But it happened. The firm he worked for, Hayward Commercial Properties, received 4 calls from clients who had read the Gazette piece and mentioned it. 2 of those clients reduced their contracts. Derek's supervisor called him in. Derek came home early that day and didn't explain why. Pamela found out from the office manager at the yoga studio, whose sister worked the front desk at Hayward. The BMW they'd been leasing at $640 a month could not be justified against a suddenly reduced commission structure, and it went back to the dealership in the second week of January. I know these things because Owen told me, in pieces, over 4 phone calls made from his bedroom with the door closed because he'd given himself permission to call regardless of what his parents had said about it. The first call was short. "Grandpa, Dad's scared." "I know, Bud. Did he do a bad thing?" The truth deserved honesty. The children deserved protection. These were not always compatible. He made some mistakes. He's figuring that out. "Are you okay?" "I'm more than okay. I'm good." The second call came at 11 at night, which told me Owen had waited until everyone was asleep. Mom and Dad are fighting a lot. Not yelling. Just that quiet kind. That's hard to be around. Sophie thinks it's her fault. It is not her fault. Not even a little bit. Tell her that from me. "Can I?" He stopped. Tried again. "Can I come see you sometime? Like, could you pick us up from school? Mom doesn't have to know right away." I want to say I hesitated, but I didn't. The third week of January, I picked them up from Harwick Elementary at 3:15. Sophie got into the truck and fell asleep against my arm within 4 blocks, the way small children sleep when they feel safe. Owen sat on the other side and looked out the window. "Is the motel okay?" he said. "I got an apartment," I said, "on Riverside. You can see the covered bridge from the kitchen. That's a nice view." "It is." We went to the apartment. I made hot chocolate with the actual milk and the actual cocoa powder, because that's how Carol made it, and shortcuts are for people who don't know what the real thing tastes like. Sophie woke up and sat at the kitchen table and did her spelling homework with the focused seriousness of a child who has been told several times that she's smart and has decided to take that seriously. Owen sat across from me and asked about the fund, about Tom, about what revocable meant versus irrevocable, because he was 13 and he processed the world by understanding its mechanisms. I told him the truth in terms a 13-year-old could hold without being crushed by. After an hour, I drove them back. They both hugged me in the parking lot of the elementary school. Sophie said, "You smell like cocoa." Owen said nothing, but he held on about 3 seconds longer than he usually would. I watched them go inside and sat in the truck until I could breathe normally again. Derek was waiting at my apartment that evening. He was standing on the walkway, not sitting, the way people stand when they've rehearsed being somewhere. He was wearing jeans and his old work jacket, the one from before the firm, and I noticed his hands were in his pockets, which was how he stood when he was a boy and wasn't sure of his welcome. He looked at me for a moment. "I know they came here," he said. "I'm not mad. They needed to. A beat." "Yeah." He looked down at the mat in front of my door, which said home in plain letters, because that was all I'd been able to find at the hardware store, and I hadn't wanted to go to a bigger store. "Can I come in?" I thought about it genuinely, not as a power move, just because I wanted to be honest about whether I was ready. "Not tonight," I said, "but I'll meet you somewhere. Saturday, 10 o'clock. He nodded. "Alden Park," I said. "The bench by the mill pond." He looked up. He knew which bench. He'd grown up 2 blocks from that park. His mother and I had sat on that bench the afternoon after his first Little League game. The one where he'd hit his first real single and looked up at the stands specifically to find us. "Okay," he said. Saturday. He left without making it into anything more than what it was, which was the first thing he'd done in a long time that reminded me of the person I'd raised. Saturday was cold, the way February in Vermont is cold, not hostile, just absolute. The mill pond had a thin skim of ice at the edges. The bench was dry. I was there first. I had coffee from the gas station because the gas station coffee was honest about what it was, and I appreciated honesty. Derek came down the path at 10 past 10 with 2 cups from the bakery on Elm Street, saw my gas station cup, and stopped. Sit down. He sat. He held the 2 cups for a moment and then put them both on the bench beside him. He looked at the pond. I looked at the pond. A pair of mallards worked the open water near the center with the determined pragmatism of creatures who did not have the option of drama. "I've been talking to someone," Derek said. "A therapist. Dr. Margolis, over in Burlington. 3 times, so far." I waited. She says he stopped. I was going to tell you what she said, but that's not. I keep trying to use other people's words. He pressed his hands together. I grew up ashamed of where we came from. Of the mill. Of the way you came home smelling like paper pulp. When I was in middle school, I used to tell people, "You managed the facility," because manager sounded better than floor worker. And I have been ashamed of that lie ever since, and I never told you. He looked at the ice. I spent 20 years chasing a version of my life where nobody would know where I started. And the further I got from it, the more you reminded me of it. And instead of just being honest about that, I turned you into the problem. The mallards moved upstream. "Dead weight," I said. "I know. At Christmas, I know what I said." In front of Owen and Sophie, he closed his eyes briefly. "I know. I don't believe in letting people off the hook too fast. Carol used to say that forgiveness without accountability was just a way of letting yourself off your own hook, and she was right about most things. So I let it sit. I need you to hear a number," I said. "Dad, let me finish." I took out the notepad, the same one from room 8 at the Comfort Rest. $225,400. That is what I gave to your life. Not what I spent on your childhood, that's just being a parent. What I gave, since you were an adult, that you took and used and mostly did not acknowledge. He didn't look away. That was something. "I don't want it back," I said. "I never wanted it back. I wanted you to know what sacrifice looks like when someone loves you. I wanted you to learn it the way I learned it from my father, who worked 30 years at a machine that took 2 of his fingers and never once complained about it. That is what I wanted to give you, not money. The knowledge of what love actually costs." The bakery cups were steaming next to him, untouched. "You don't get to call me dead weight," I said quietly. "Not after 30 years of carrying you. You don't get to use your children as leverage to get your mortgage paid. And you don't get to use therapy language to make your greed sound like growth." He was quiet for a long time. The ducks rounded a bend and disappeared. "Tell me what I need to do," he said. "Not what you want from me generally. Specifically, I need to know what to do." Carol would have recognized that. That was the Derek who came to us at 17 and told us he'd failed pre-calc and needed help before his parents could find out from the school. Except that we were his parents, and he'd come to us anyway. That directness, that willingness to be accountable when the performance was too exhausting to maintain. She'd always said that was the best of him. I had made a list. I gave it to him. Continued counseling, individual and family, every week, not as needed. Volunteer work with the Harwick Senior Mutual Fund, 1 Saturday a month, without recognition. A written acknowledgement to Owen and Sophie, age appropriate, honest that what had happened at Christmas was wrong and was his responsibility, not theirs. No further discussion of finances between us, ever. His money was his problem to solve. I was not a line item. And finally, he would sit down with me and go through every one of those $225,000, line by line, not to create guilt, but to create understanding. Because he had a son who was watching him. And that son was going to make his own decisions someday about what kind of person he was going to be. Derek took the list. He read it twice. He didn't negotiate any of it. He signed the copy I'd made. Tom's idea. We sat for another few minutes without talking. The cold was the good kind now, the kind that clarifies rather than closes. There's one more thing, I said. The Grange was full the Saturday we held the spring dedication. Roberta had organized it with the efficiency of someone who spent 30 years making county government work against its own resistance. And the room was standing capacity, folding chairs, all taken, the smell of donated coffee, and someone's homemade coffee cake that had appeared on the table by the door and was gone within 20 minutes. The Harwick Senior Mutual Fund had raised $62,000. We'd helped 9 people directly, prevented 3 foreclosures, covered emergency medications for 2 members, provided legal consultation for 4 cases in progress. The state senator's office had sent a letter. Channel 7 out of Burlington had sent a crew. I had asked them to focus on the work and not on me, and they had mostly respected that. I introduced Derek to Roberta, to Pete, to Tom, to Bernard and Helen and Gail from the original circle. I did not make it a ceremony. I simply said, "This is my son. He's learning." Derek shook hands and made no speeches. He helped set up chairs. He spent 20 minutes talking to Bernard about the restaurant loan, not as a success story, but as a cautionary one. At the end, he helped fold and stack. Owen and Sophie had come with Pamela. Sophie found me immediately and held my hand through most of it. Owen stood next to his father, and I watched him watch Derek, that careful, observational watching of a child who is revising his understanding of someone. Pamela caught my eye once across the room. She didn't speak. She nodded. I nodded back. That was enough. At the end, after most people had gone, I stood at the window of the Grange and looked out at Maplewood Road in the early April light. The maples were starting, that tentative first green that Vermont holds on to so briefly before it commits. Tom appeared beside me. "You know, the state office called this week. They want to use this as a model for 2 other counties. Roberta would be better to lead that. She said the same thing about you." I watched a pickup truck slow at the stop sign and then move on. There's no credit worth taking for people treating each other right. He was quiet for a moment. "Your wife would have liked this." I thought about Carol's handwriting in the address book, her reading glasses, which I still could not bring myself to pack away, which sat now on my nightstand in the apartment on Riverside, with the view of the covered bridge, her voice asking questions that clarified rather than closed. "She would have organized it better," I said. Tom laughed. So did I. On the way home, I stopped at the park. The bench by the mill pond had dried in the afternoon sun. I sat alone for a while, watching the water move the way it always had, indifferent and continuous. I don't know what the next months will hold. Derek is making his mortgage payment. He is going to counseling. He called Owen on a Tuesday for no reason except to apologize, specifically for Christmas. And Owen told me about it in one of our now weekly calls, not with drama, just as a thing that had happened that he wanted me to know. Sophie has resumed drawing horses. She gave me one last week that is labeled Grandpa and his horse, and now includes a small figure of a man standing beside the horse, arms slightly out, like someone in the middle of a conversation. I framed it. Justice, I've been thinking lately, is not what happens to the people who hurt you. Justice is what you build after they do. It is the thing you make from the wreckage that is better than what was there before. Not because of the wreckage, but despite it. It is the group of 8 people in folding chairs on a Wednesday night who stop being victims the moment they walk into that room and become something sturdier instead. It is $62,000 and 9 families who kept their homes. It is a 13-year-old boy learning, by watching, what integrity actually looks like when it costs something. My wife used to say that the best thing you can leave a child is the example of how to be. I am still working on that. We all are. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. And if you have your own story, I want to hear it. Click the box on the left for the next one. Thank you for being here.